In 1683, the mighty Ottoman Empire stood at the gates of Vienna. Europe's last defense was about to fall. But then, the King of Poland rode in with a charge so powerful, it saved an entire continent. The summer of 1683 was a season of terror in Christendom. Vienna, the proud capital of the Habsburgs, lay encircled by the might of the Ottoman Empire. Grand Vizier Kara Mustafa had marched with an army said to number over 100,000. Janissaries in scarlet coats, Sipahi cavalry with lances gleaming, engineers with cannon that battered the city day and night. Inside the walls, Vienna starved. Civilians huddled in cellars as shells tore through their homes. Disease stalked the streets, the stench of corpses drifting on the hot wind. Yet still the defenders clung to the ramparts. Austrian soldiers, German volunteers, even desperate townsfolk, all knowing that if Vienna fell, the road to Europe would lie open. From the city towers, watchers saw the endless sea of Ottoman tents stretching across the plain, their green banners fluttering like forests. At night, drums and pipes echoed, mocking the weary garrison. But beyond the horizon, salvation was stirring. The Holy League had been called to arms, and at its head rode the one man whose name struck fear into the enemies of Christendom. Jan III Sobieski, King of Poland. Sobieski was no stranger to war. Tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes sharp as a falcon's, he had built his throne not by inheritance but by the sword. To his soldiers, he was not merely a king but a commander who rode in the dust beside them, who knew hunger and exhaustion as they did. When word reached him of Vienna's plight, he swore before his nobles and his God, "I go to save not just a city, but all of Europe." Across Poland, banners were raised. Winged Hussars, the most feared cavalry in the world, polished their lances and strapped on their wings, their armor gleaming like silver in the sun. As the Ottomans tightened their noose around Vienna, few inside the walls knew that far to the north, the thunder of hooves was already on its way, and with it the fate of empires. The alliance gathered like a storm front crawling over Europe. From the German principalities came contingents in sober colors, pikemen and cuirassiers hardened by border wars. From Bavaria rode Elector Max Emanuel with dragoons in sky-blue coats. Saxon standards snapped, Franconian flags tilted, and across the Danube Valley the bells rang as villagers watched columns of men tramp south. But when the Poles appeared, the air itself seemed to brighten. Winged hussars with eagle-feathered frames arching from their saddles, leopard skins flung over mail, lances taller than men, pennons fluttering like tongues of flame. Jan III Sobieski rode at their head. He carried not only a marshal's baton but a father's worry, for with him rode his son Jakub, proud and young. At campfires the king spoke little, writing by candlelight to his beloved Marazienka in a tight, deliberate hand, "We hasten to Vienna. Pray God grant us swiftness and one decisive blow." Then he folded the letter and looked toward the black line of mountains that guarded the city like balled fists. The Vienna woods. Beyond those ridges, inside Vienna, Count Starhemberg held on by fingernails. Janissaries crept like ants along trenches, engineers mining the bastions, stuffing galleries with powder. At dawn the Ottomans set off charges that ripped the earth, vomited stones and men into the sky, and left breaches clawing at the heart of the city. Starhemberg, one arm bound in a bloody sling, limped the parapets and hissed orders. "Plug it. With earth, with timber, with bodies if need be." Drums throbbed from the Ottoman lines, pipes keened. Green banners rolled and pitched like ships on an iron sea. Bread was a memory. Faith had teeth marks. Between the city and salvation lay the Tulln Plain and a snarl of ravines and ridgelines perfect for ambush. Tatar screens probed the Allied march, smoke rising from villages like black exclamation points. Polish scouts slipped through underbrush, returned with breathless reports. Vizier camps broad and careless, tents in avenues, cannon masked by gabions. He thinks the city already his. At Tulln the Allied commanders met in a ring of wagons. The Emperor's general, Charles of Lorraine, saluted the Polish king with formal stiffness that thawed when strategy filled the air. "Your Majesty," he said, arms sweeping toward the dark hills. "The shortest road is the steepest. Sobieski grinned, wolfish. Then we climb. He traced the route with a dagger point, over Kahlenberg, knife along a ridge, down upon the Ottoman flank like a falling star. Drums in the Polish camp answered with a steady heartbeat. Far off, cannon muttered to the sky, and in the hush between sounds, every man felt it. The world gathering itself for a single, shuddering moment. On the morning of September 11th, the city of Vienna seemed already half-swallowed by death. Breaches gaped in the walls, smoke curled from shattered towers, and the defenders could scarcely lift their muskets. Starhemberg's messengers galloped out at night, slipping past Tatar patrols with desperate pleas. If help does not come tomorrow, the city falls. But beyond the hills, the vast Ottoman camp sprawled like a city of silk. Kara Mustafa Pasha walked its avenues with deliberate calm, his emerald robes trailing in the dust, his guards stepping silent behind. He had arrayed his army with precision. Janissaries in their white felt caps guarding the trenches, Sipahi horsemen patrolling the flanks, thousands of cannon mouths glinting under the sun. His pavilion, striped in green and gold, towered above all, crowned with crescents. To his mind, the victory was already his. "Let them starve," he murmured to his officers, his voice a velvet blade. "Let Vienna crumble to dust. Then we ride into the heart of Christendom. Rome itself will tremble." Yet some commanders shifted uneasily. The vizier had left his rear exposed, his camp sprawling and undisciplined. Reports of approaching Poles and Germans trickled in, but Kara Mustafa dismissed them with a flick of his hand. They will not dare attack such numbers, and if they come, the Sultan's banners will crush them as easily as Vienna. In the city, Starhemberg climbed a bastion and saw the hills to the northwest stirring with movement. Distant banners, glints of armor. His heart leapt. "They are coming," he whispered. "By God, they are coming." That night, as the Ottomans launched another furious assault on the crumbling walls, the hills above Kahlenberg thundered with the sound of axes. Allied soldiers hacked roads through the woods, dragging cannon up slopes where even goats faltered. Men collapsed from exhaustion, but Sobieski rode among them, his booming voice carrying through the trees. "Forward, brothers! Tomorrow the world will watch us. Tomorrow we strike, and all Europe will remember our names." The campfires burned red along the ridge, unseen by the Ottomans below. And in Vienna, defenders whispered prayers into the smoke, clinging to hope as the city trembled on the edge of ruin. The dawn of deliverance was at hand. Dawn broke over the Kahlenberg ridge in a blaze of gold. Below, the Ottoman camp stretched like an ocean, tents shimmering white and green, minarets of smoke twisting into the sky. Beyond them, Vienna lay broken and battered, its walls bleeding dust, its towers half-collapsed. But atop the ridge stood the assembled host of Christendom, an army born of desperation and faith. First came the Germans, regiments from Saxony, Franconia, and Bavaria, their musketeers drilling in grim silence, their pikemen bristling like hedgehogs. Charles of Lorraine rode before them, his banner of the Habsburg eagle snapping in the wind. Beside them, the contingents of the Holy Roman Princes arrayed in disciplined lines. Drums beat, standards dipped, and their cannon were dragged into place with grunting effort, wheels digging into the soft earth. Then came the Poles. They were unlike any other warriors on the field. The Winged Hussars, gleaming helmets, breastplates polished like mirrors, their wings arching high with eagle feathers that rattled in the breeze, looked less like men than avenging angels. Behind them rode panzerni and light cavalry, their lances tall as banners, their sabers curved like crescents. When they formed ranks, even the Germans stopped to stare. At their head was Jan III Sobieski, king and warrior both. His armor gleamed, his crimson sash flared, and in his hand he carried a great curved saber. His horse stamped restlessly as the king lifted his eyes toward the Ottoman camp below. He turned to his officers. "This day will be remembered as long as men speak of nations. We march not only for Vienna, but for Europe, for Christendom, for our children yet unborn." A murmur rippled through the host, swelling into cheers, hymns, and battle cries. Priests lifted crucifixes, soldiers kissed relics, and trumpets blared across the ridge. From below, the Ottomans stirred at last, astonished by the sight of an army descending from the hills they thought impassable. Drums thundered, horsemen scrambled into their saddles, and Kara Mustafa's tent flaps whipped in the morning wind. The ridge shook with the first step of tens of thousands advancing downhill. The crusade had begun. The Allied host poured down from the Kahlenberg like a river of steel. Cannon thundered from the heights, their balls tearing through Ottoman tents and trenches, scattering men and horses in chaos. German infantry advanced in grim, disciplined blocks, pikes lowered, muskets flashing. The Bavarians and Saxons pushed straight into the Ottoman left, their banners rising above smoke and dust. Rodrigo-like cries of faith erupted in every tongue. Jesus Maria, Vergot und Vaterland, Za Wulnask, until the hillside shook with the roar of 100 nations. Below, the Ottomans scrambled to meet them. Janissaries in white felt caps surged from their trenches, muskets cracking, scimitars flashing. Sipahi cavalry wheeled into formation, their lances leveled as they thundered into the German ranks. The clash was terrible, steel against steel, flesh against iron. Men fell screaming into the churned mud, their banners vanishing beneath trampling hooves. At the center, Kara Mustafa barked furious orders, his face pale but defiant. Drive them back, crush them against the city walls. His drummers pounded, his green banners rippled, and wave after wave of soldiers hurled themselves into the narrowing valley. But the Allies pressed harder. Charles of Lorraine led the imperial regiments forward, his cuirassiers charging through fire and smoke. To his right, Bavarian dragoons poured volleys into the enemy lines, cutting swaths through the Janissaries. Step by step, the Ottomans were forced back toward their camp, the ground quaking under the weight of the onslaught. From the ridge, the Polish army watched, still held in reserve. Their plumes and wings caught the sun, their lances bristling like a second forest poised to descend. Jan Sobieski sat tall in the saddle, his eyes burning as he measured the battle below. "Not yet," he murmured. "Let them bleed each other first. Then we strike." The Germans, exhausted, held firm against counterattack, but the field grew desperate. Smoke blinded, gunfire deafened, the air stank of powder and blood. And still, above it all, the Polish king waited, his hussars pawing the earth like lions before the hunt. The hammer had not yet fallen. By afternoon, the battle swayed like a ship in a storm. The Germans and Austrians had fought for hours, pushing the Ottoman lines back but bleeding for every yard. Their ranks were ragged, their muskets fouled with powder, their arms trembling from the weight of pike and sword. Kara Mustafa saw their exhaustion and drove his men harder. "One more push," he shouted, his emerald robes whipping in the smoke. "Break them and the city is ours." His Janissaries surged forward in fresh waves, drums hammering like thunder, their war cries rolling across the plain. The imperial line buckled, bending dangerously close to collapse. And then, at last, Sobieski raised his hand. A trumpet blast split the air. The ridge behind the Allied line erupted in motion as 20,000 Poles and their allies began to descend. At their heart, 3,000 winged hussars formed into wedges, lances gleaming like spears of light. The sun caught their wings, feathers rattling, turning them into a host of angels in the smoke. Sobieski's voice carried over the din. "Forward! For God! For Poland! For Vienna!" The earth shook as the hussars spurred downhill. Cavalry, light and heavy, poured behind them, a torrent of hooves and steel. Their lances leveled, pennons streaming. They gathered speed until the very ground seemed to thunder with their fury. Below, the Ottomans turned in horror. The Poles are coming." Panic rippled through the camp. Sipahi cavalry tried to form a wall, but the sight of the charging hussars broke their nerve. Sobieski himself led the central wedge, his white plume blazing. He lowered his lance, his horse straining, and bellowed, "Strike them down!" The impact was apocalyptic. The hussars tore through the Ottoman cavalry like a scythe through wheat, splintering lances, hurling men and horses aside. The crash echoed across the battlefield, a single decisive blow that shattered the enemy's will. From the city walls, the starving defenders saw it and cried out with tears of joy. The relief is here. Bells rang, muskets fired in celebration, and hope surged through the battered city. The Lion of Poland had entered the field, and the end of the Ottoman dream was at hand. The valley below Kahlenberg became a storm of wings and steel. Sobieski's hussars crashed into the Ottoman camp with unstoppable fury, their lances driving deep, their sabers flashing in deadly arcs. Horses reared, pennons snapped in the wind, and the thunder of hooves drowned even the roar of cannon. Alberto-like cries rose from the Polish lines, "Jesus Maria, za Polsk, za Weden." The sound carried like a divine trumpet, rolling over the battlefield and striking terror into Ottoman hearts. Kara Mustafa's soldiers, so confident only hours before, now wavered. Sipahis tried to regroup, but the hussars hit them again and again, wedges of armored cavalry smashing into their flanks. Infantry broke under the weight of the charge, janissaries cut down where they stood. Even the elite cracked as the wave of horsemen split their ranks like fire through dry straw. Sobieski himself led the spear point. His saber whistled, cleaving through helmets, his horse plunging into the thickest of the foe. Beside him rode his son Jakub, his young face streaked with dust and blood, matching his father stroke for stroke. The king spared him a glance, pride burning in his chest even amid the slaughter. From the walls of Vienna, the defenders wept with relief. They fired muskets into the air in salute, bells pealed, and men who had prepared for death now shouted with renewed life, "Sobieski! Sobieski has come!" The Ottoman camp dissolved into chaos. Tents caught fire, smoke rolled, horses bolted riderless through the press. Kara Mustafa stood before his great pavilion, staring in disbelief as the Polish king's banner pierced the heart of his army. His voice, once velvet, now cracked with fury, "Hold! Stand, you cowards! Hold for the Sultan!" But it was too late. The tide was broken. The hussars cut through the last line of resistance and drove straight for the vizier's pavilion, their feathers rattling like the wings of judgment. In a single charge, the fate of Europe had been decided, and the Ottomans, who had once dreamed of marching to Rome, now faced only ruin. The hussars did not stop. Their charge tore straight through the Ottoman heart, scattering soldiers who only hours before had seemed an unstoppable tide. Polish banners surged forward amid smoke and flame, their lances broken but their sabers flashing with deadly rhythm. Sobieski, at the head, carved his way toward the vizier's pavilion. Around him, the remnants of Kara Mustafa's guard fought with desperate courage, janissaries throwing themselves into the path of the charge, but nothing could blunt the fury of the Polish cavalry. Horses trampled men into the dust, sabers split helmets, and muskets fired at point-blank range. From the hills, the Allied armies pressed harder. The Bavarians stormed through the Ottoman left, driving their enemy into flight. Saxons and Austrians hammered the trenches, their pikemen pushing into the broken ranks. The defenders of Vienna surged from the city gates at last, falling upon the rear of the Ottoman forces with the rage of men who had starved for months. Everywhere, the crescent banners fell. Kara Mustafa stood before his pavilion, his silk robes stained with dust, his eyes fixed on the chaos he could no longer command. The camp that had once seemed eternal now burned, its avenues of tents collapsing under the weight of terror. "This cannot be," he whispered, his voice thin against the roar of battle. The city was ours. It was ours. Then Sobieski's wedge struck. Hussars thundered past the great green pavilion, trampling its guards. The vizier barely escaped with his life, fleeing into the smoke as his banner was torn down. The Allied host roared in triumph as the crescent standard toppled into the mud. On the walls of Vienna, priests fell to their knees, tears streaming as bells rang and voices shouted in chorus, "God wills it! Victory!" The greatest army the Ottomans had ever sent into Europe dissolved into ruin, fleeing south in chaos. And as the sun set over the smoking plain, Jan Sobieski raised his sword high, his voice carrying above the tumult. Venemus, Vitimus, Deus Vicit. We came, we saw, God conquered. The battlefield became a vast river of flight. What had once been a disciplined Ottoman host now dissolved into a torrent of panic. Janissaries threw aside muskets, Sipahis spurred their exhausted horses south, and servants tore down silken tents in frantic haste. The thunder of retreat echoed louder than the cannon fire had hours before. Sobieski's hussars pursued, sabers flashing in the smoke. They cut down fugitives, trampled standards into the earth, and scattered what little order remained. Behind them, German cuirassiers and Austrian infantry surged through the broken trenches, claiming abandoned cannon and slaughtering stragglers. The Allies pressed forward without mercy, determined to finish what had begun on the ridge. From the city gates, Starhemberg's garrison erupted like men reborn. Gaunt, ragged soldiers who had been ready to die that very morning now charged into the rout with savage cries, bayonets and swords striking down the besiegers who had tormented them for months. Some wept even as they fought, unable to believe Vienna still stood. Kara Mustafa fled with a small retinue, his emerald standard gone, his vast army collapsing behind him. He spurred south toward Hungary, the weight of failure clinging heavier than his robes. The dream of planting the crescent upon the cathedrals of Europe was ash, trampled beneath Polish hooves. On the field, Jan Sobieski dismounted before the great green pavilion. He looked over the wreckage of the Ottoman camp. Silks torn, jewels scattered, cannon abandoned like toys, and crossed himself. His words, sharp and solemn, carried to those nearest. Not for glory nor crowns, but for God and Christendom have we fought this day. Around him, soldiers knelt, exhausted and bloodied, their armor scorched, their faces lit by the flames of the burning camp. The bells of Vienna tolled wildly, a song of salvation rolling across the night. Europe had been spared. The Polish king had shattered the greatest threat of the age. And the name Sobieski was written into legend. Morning broke over Vienna, revealing a plain transformed into ruin and glory. The Ottoman camp lay silent, its avenues of silken tents torn, its banners trampled into mud. Bodies of janissaries, Sipahis, and hussars alike littered the earth, mingled with shattered cannon and broken lances. Smoke drifted in ragged columns toward the sky, and the bells of the city rang ceaselessly, proclaiming deliverance. The gates of Vienna opened, and Count Starhemberg, gaunt and wounded, rode out to meet his savior. He dismounted before Jan Sobieski and fell to one knee. "Majesty," he said hoarsely, "you have not only saved Vienna, you have saved Christendom." Sobieski, still dusty from battle, lifted him to his feet. His gaze was steady, his voice low but carrying. "It was not I, but God, who gave the victory. Venemus, Vitimus, Deus Vicit." Around them, the allied host gathered. Bavarians, Saxons, Austrians, and Poles stood together in the morning light, their banners fluttering side by side. Men embraced weeping, others fell to the ground in prayer. For once, centuries of division seemed to dissolve into shared triumph. In the city streets, starving children clutched bread again, women wept openly, and priests led processions of thanksgiving. Every stone of Vienna seemed to tremble with relief, and word of the miracle spread faster than any courier. Within weeks, all of Europe would know that the Ottoman tide had been broken at its highest crest. Kara Mustafa, humiliated, fled back to the Sultan. His failure was so great that no excuse could save him. He would meet his end in disgrace, strangled with a silken cord in Belgrade. The empire he had sought to expand had been dealt a wound it would never heal. As for Sobieski, he returned to Poland hailed as the savior of Europe, the Lion of Lechisten. Yet in his heart, he thought not of glory, but of his soldiers who lay still upon the field, and of the city that had endured the storm. Vienna stood, Christendom lived, and the charge of the Polish hussars would echo through history as the day Europe was saved by the courage of a king.